Greetings and welcome to the People's Ascension for our first episode of WIP Workshop. We're here today with Barney Menzies of Parable Games to talk about their Shiver game, a classic horror TTRPG. This is my first time covering a horror game, and I'm real excited to learn more about it and talk about it. But before we get going, just my own usual spiel. This being the first episode of our work in process workshop. This is probably not going to be a weekly series, but we're gonna be looking at indie TTRPG creators on a somewhat regular basis. I plan on doing about two per month, depending on the the influx of creators at that particular time. But there is never any shortage of people creating new games, and they're all so good. RPGs Uncovered, the sort of parent series of this, is dedicated to exploring indie RPGs because they're right now is the best time to get into new games, and particularly small team solo creator indie TTRPGs, because there's so many great games out there, so many more being produced every day, so many being funded every day, that there's no reason to just stick to the big brands. And I know a lot of people are familiar, of course, with the Dungeons and the Dragons, but if you're looking for something new, there are so many other great games in every genre out there, in every level of complexity, from little business card games to one pages to little zines of 30, 50 pages or whatnot, to full 300-page core books if you're looking for something with more complexity to it. So there's every opportunity and every reason right now to get into some new indie TTRPGs. So we are going to be exploring that, and well, Parable Games here already has the baseline for the core game of Shiver already out, but they are funding for the Gothic expansion, and there's an asterisk next to that funding because it's already funded. It's been one day. It started yesterday, and it's already funded. So obviously a great outpouring of support there. Well deserved. A great game. Really looking forward to learning more about it. We'll be talking with Barney here shortly. But if you like what we're doing here on RPGs Uncovered and you want to see more of this, particularly our WIP Workshop series, the best way to support is really just telling people about it. This is a new show at a new time, so just letting people know that it's going on and that it's interesting will help a lot. Bring people into the live stream, the Twitch showing. This will be going up on YouTube shortly, so you can find a link down below. Invite people to go check that out there. And of course, we are on Discord and Twitter. Those links down below as well. You can come hang out with me, check out any announcements for things I have going on. Shiver is part of the People's Ascension Discord, so they are available on there to chat with, talk about the game. I'm not gonna speak for Barney here. I know he's got a lot of work going on right now, so don't pester him too much. But I have a lot of great creators on our Discord site, so if you're looking for a new game, or just looking to talk about indie games and how they're created, or how to play them, there are a ton of creators on the People's Ascension Discord at the moment, and growing. And of course, we have our own support sites. I will drop those links in chat. Right now, most of that focuses on the parent series RPGs Uncovered, with a lot of player and GM insights that you can get for your support. But if this sort of pilot episode is successful, there's definitely going to be things that are going to uh, I'll be making available to supporters in some way or another. But that's the best way to increase the quality and quantity of our shows, because unfortunately doing things costs money. So any support you give through there will go right back into the show to get things like to pay things like writers and other content creators, musicians, artists, that sort of thing, all going right back into the community. Because, like I said, RPGs Uncovered is all about giving back, promoting, and expanding our horizons through smaller creators, indie creators. Okay, so I think I've been chatting long enough here. That's my whole card for the spiel. Let's get into what we're actually doing today. So let me introduce Barney here of Parable Games. Hello and welcome.
Hello, hello, hello. Thank you very much for having me on this pilot episode.
Well, thank you for being our guinea pig. uh,
You are welcome.
Anyone who's been following RPGs Uncovered will find a similar format to what we've been doing in the first episode of each of the series. So not much of a guinea pig, but first episode of a new season is always fun and a little nerve-wracking.
I bet this is gonna be fun though. Delve into some cool stuff. I imagine you've got some interesting questions to ask me about games, so we can get stuck in.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we get too into that, do you have any announcements? Obviously, you,
Yeah,
you
so
have the
so
Kickstarter.
obviously my name's Brian. I'm from Parable Games. I'm the lead sort of developer. I do a lot of the technical rules writing, and also sort of oversee the project in terms of making sure the books get made, getting them to where they need to be, and just kind of bringing everything together is my role at Parable. We have our Kickstarter live right now, which is Shiver Gothic. You can find that on Kickstarter or pretty much anywhere that you search for Shiver. Um, if you want to find out more about Shiver, we also have a website which is shiverrpg.com. On there, you'll find all kinds of information about the game, as well as some resources, things like character sheets, access to a free version of the game. You just jump on our mailing list and you get yourself a free quick start. We also have our digital dice rolling app on there, as Shiver does use some very pretty symbolic dice. So we've got a digital app for people to use so that if you don't have those dice, you can still play the game and not have to worry about that. If you want to get in touch with us, we are on lots of the social medias. Best places to find us are Facebook, which is at ShiverRPG, and also on Twitter at Games Parable. We've also got a YouTube channel, ShiverRPG, which has tutorials, one shots, various other content as well.
All right. Awesome. I have been dropping your links as you've been talking about them, so hopefully we can get people checking those out. All right. There we go. Okay. Yeah, let's jump into this then. Oh, and of course, on that link tree, you'll find the link to the new Kickstarter. As I said before, only one day in, fully funded, generous and well-deserved outpouring of support. Let me actually start there. We'll get into more specific questions there. But what was that like? Funded in 2 hours.
Yeah, that was a wild ride. So Kickstarter's kind of a doing Kickstarter launch kind of a bit of a Herculean task, really. You spend ages agonizing over the project page and what it looks like, designing the video, making sure that you've got every little possible piece of information that people could want to know right from the outset out there. You've got to plan out your pledge levels. So it feels like you've been doing it forever. And the pushing of the button to go live is a very sort of cathartic experience to have all of that work finished. But it also, when you push that button, you have so many things you have to do. You have to rush around and post on all your social medias and send out emails and update your website so that it has the correct links so that people can find all of your things, which you can only do once you're live. So what happens is you push the button and then immediately you run away from the Kickstarter and start doing all this work. And I kind of had the surreal experience of starting doing all of this stuff and coming back sort of halfway through that first 2 hours and being like, oh, what what's going on? Like this is crazy. So yeah, it's very humbling and amazing experience. Have like the community support us so readily. We had an early bird goal if we funded in the first 48 hours, which seems now to be a comical kind of goal because we're not even at 48 hours yet, and we're over 200% funded. So it's been really great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking over the Kickstarter page right now again, and there's a lot of great stuff. I mean, I gotta hand it to you and your art director.
Yeah, Ben's done an absolutely amazing job
Yeah,
with this project. We spent a lot of time with the first the core Shiver game, developing this art style, which people really sort of resonated with and really enjoyed. And Gothic, we just got to go absolutely all in on the Gothic feel of it, and developing that style to be really true to the genre that we were trying to display. And Ben and also Chris, who's done some of our environment pieces, the cathedral and the building made of pipes that you can see on the Kickstarter page, both done by Chris, and he's done an absolutely amazing job, sort of tweaking his style and bringing that into the overall Shiver visual identity.
yeah, amazing art, and it's very consistent and it's very evocative of that genre and that time period that you're going for. And everyone loves great art to go with a rule book.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those where if you were to pick up an RPG book and it was just hundreds of pages of plain text and tables, it would feel like a mammoth task. But
Mm,
when you're reading through and you've got that visual aid for, oh, I'm reading this character creation section and there's an ability, and oh, I can see that ability has been portrayed in a piece of art, and I can get that in my head and in my sort of creative idea of how I want to build a character. Or similarly with like it's especially important for this project because a huge portion of the book is the setting and story that we've
mhm.
built, for players to tell their Gothic stories, and having art that shows an idea of what that could look like really helps people delve deep into that world.
Oh yeah. We'll definitely be talking about more about the specific setting later. Uh, but with the Kickstarter already fully funded, 200%, you said. What can you tell us about the stretch goals you have planned now that you're well and
We're,
above
we're,
the
we're, we're,
baseline?
we're smashing through stretch goals so fast that I think even our editor of the page is struggling to keep up with the changes, because I can see that we've got another one unlocked that will be coming soon. So yeah, so we funded and we have unlocked 3 stretch goals already. So the first stretch goal is some new skill branches for the monster archetypes. So one of the things that we brought into Shiver Gothic as an expansion of the core Shiver game is we wanted players to be able to take on the role of their favorite Gothic monsters and explore stories kind of from the other side of the coin. Looking at like what's it like to be a vampire, what's it like to be Frankenstein's monster, how does that affect the lens with which you view the story and how it's being told. Um, you can play anything from a whole collective group of different monsters that have maybe come together, or you can be the secret monster in a group of otherwise normal people who have no idea, and you can reveal that during the story. And that is loads of options for really great role play moments there. One of the things we want to do, obviously, is broaden that as much as we can. So the stretch goals, we've got some extra skill ability trees and things that you can explore um, with those stretch goals to get really deep into some of the more niche and interesting monsters that maybe you wouldn't be able to explore from the central tree. So things like the Invisible Man is a very specific set of abilities. It doesn't really have much beyond the core abilities that you would get in the scholar archetype that you would get in the core game of the classic character that has some intelligence and maybe experimented on themselves, and then suddenly they've turned themselves invisible and you're down this monster path. So you've got a combination of those two ideas. So that's the first stretch goal. We've added some more detail for that feature, which I know is one that people have been really excited to play with, and when we've been playtesting it, it's been hoots. People have been really enjoying taking on the role of monsters. Second upgrade is a book upgrade for Secrets of Spyhome. So that's the first book with a lot of the new mechanics in, but also where the main story is. So we'll be upgrading that book to add some custom end papers. We're getting a full map of the city that the story is set in, worked up, and we're gonna put that on the end papers, so you'll have a nice detailed end paper that you'll also be able to flip open quickly as a reference. And we'll be adding some nice ribbon and other details to the book to make it bring it up another level, and make it even nicer. Then our third stretch goal that we've unlocked, which I'm just going to check now because it's not being put on the graphic. Our third stretch goal is some additional backgrounds. So when you're building characters in Shiver, you have two main sections. You have your archetype, and then you have your background. Your archetype is the main linchpin of what role your character plays within the story. So if you're playing, we'll continue with the scholar example. The scholar is the character in the story that uses their intelligence to interact with the world. That's the crux of that character. And I want to play a scholar. The scholar has loads of abilities that link to that kind of theme. But then I want to give my scholar some identity. I need to flesh out that character. And so that's what backgrounds do. They're not linked to any of the archetypes. They are entirely there to give a narrative twist and flavor to a specific character. So in the main book, in the core book, we have things like the jock. A great example. Where I want to play the varsity school on the varsity school sports team. Maybe my character is really good at sports. Maybe that's what the benefit of being the jock is. But maybe the downside is that I am not so great at interacting with things where I've got to think about things as much. You know, the classic trope. And we've got loads of backgrounds like that in Shiver Gothic that are all specific to the Gothic theme. So some of the ones that we have in the core book already are things like the urchin. You're going to live up your Oliver Twist life to your heart's content as you run around the streets. You know, all the shortcuts, but maybe when you're going into a public place, you're going to get chased out by an officious member of staff. And we've got things like monster hunter backgrounds. We've got sort of rat catchers, grave robbers, like the whole suite of things that you'd expect to find in that sort of grimy, almost low fantasy kind of environment. And we're just going to be adding some more specific ones to each of the books as the most recently unlocked stretch goal. Then we've got one more, which we'll be adding, which will be at 25,000. And that's going to be another book grade, but for Dregstone instead. And we're going to be doing a very similar thing, adding some custom end papers, adding ribbon, and making that book an even nicer thing to have on your shelf and to pour over to your heart's content.
Nice. I do love a fancy rule book.
We were very excited. So one of my unenviable jobs really is to tell the team what we can and cannot do in terms of exciting things. And one of the things that everybody wanted to do that we didn't quite manage to do with the first Kickstarter is we really wanted to do a special edition version of the core rulebook. And we couldn't work out how to make it work. And for this project, we've managed to get that special edition cover for the main Secrets of Spyhome book, and we're so excited to get that and get that made.
Very nice. Yeah, I know in the modern age of gaming, with so much of it done online, people especially the younger generation, don't have the large bookshelves of books anymore. They have a large folder on their computer with PDFs, and I'm guilty of that too. One, because they're cheaper and money is an object, but also because they're easily referenced. You can pull up multiple at a time. But there's just something really satisfying about having a physical book, especially a special edition book. It makes it almost like a display piece rather than necessarily just a rule book.
Yeah, so well, everybody on the team are big book addicts. We have not just RPG books, but I mean, I'm a big into my fiction. My brother is big on comic collected editions and things like that. So we're sort of very into what cool stuff can we do physically with the books, but also on the other side of the coin, we understand like the PDFs are so useful. We use them all the time, obviously for playtesting, because not all of our playtesters are in the same place, so you have to test online. And yeah, it space is an issue. Like you can't have every RPG book in the world; your house would explode.
Yeah.
The PDFs are also great for us from a Kickstarter standpoint. It means we can get the books out to people much quicker because people can get the PDFs while printers check things and you put things on boats, and it means that people can really get stuck in early, and that's another great thing as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, with all that on the Kickstarter out of the way, let's jump into some actual questions, more specifically about you and your experiences. So, of course, for our viewers, you've probably noticed you're based in the UK.
And indeed,
And this is your Parable Games is mostly you and your brother, and then you have like your art director, and you mentioned somebody else, but you're a fairly small
yeah.
team.
So it's the core team is me and my brother started the company together, and then Ben joined us to do the art for the project, and that's kind of how everything kicked off. And then since then, we've been bringing in some more people to start expanding the game and expanding our pool of contributors. So we now have Chris as well, who has done some environment illustrations for Gothic, and they're amazing. His work is stunning. And we've got another writer as well, who will be joining us not for this project, but for the next projects that we've currently got hiding in the shadows.
Very nice. So more to come, which is exciting.
Yes, yeah, it's one of the questions we got asked quite a lot with the first Kickstarter was, is this going to be like a one and done, like here's the system and no more support? And we very much wanted to show our intention that we want to make Shiver a permanent mainstay in the RPG world, and also we have so many horror genres that we want to explore. Gothic is merely the first of the many genres of horror that we'd like to get really deep into. So we've got lots of books that we want to make. So we're definitely going to be bringing out some more stuff after this Kickstarter.
Very nice. Very nice. Okay, so Barney, I see it on your website. It shows that you have it says listed there you have over a decade of experience in the gaming industry, spanning marketing and content creation. What can you tell us about that?
So my first job in sort of the broader gaming industry was I did a lot of YouTube content, which back in the early days of YouTube. So I did some work for a production company doing live play videos and things of that nature. So that was kind of my first foray into gaming, was actually video gaming. That kind of fell by the wayside a little bit as I moved on from school, because I was doing that when I was quite young. I had a sort of transition in a weird way from playing video games to moving to games on the tabletop. So when I was playing video games, one of the games that I ended up playing just as a bit of downtime was the Magic the Gathering Jewels of the Planeswalkers game on the Xbox. and that led down a deep rabbit hole of me getting into Magic the Gathering and other tabletop games. I did a lot of playing of Magic mostly as a student. Whilst as an impoverished student, I wanted to travel around the world and play cards, which you can do in the UK, which is nice because Europe's so close. We get to go around and play tournaments and things like that, if you can afford it. So what happened was I started buying and selling collections of cards to fund that very expensive habit. And eventually that became the main thing that I was doing, and the playing cards became less and less, which spawned my business that I run other than Parable, which is Seventh City Collectibles, which is a local game store in Nottingham where Parable's also based. So that's been running for 7-8 years now, a while. I've been running that. So that's given me a big knowledge base of how the games industry works as a whole, experience with dealing with distribution and how to bring things to market, how to market things, and how to talk to people about games, but also a person like in a shop that has to recommend people games, speaking to them and finding out what they want from games, like what isn't there, what's missing. And that's kind of how Shiver came about, really, is my brother came to me with the bare bones, the kind of like the knuckle bones of Shiver. He'd been playing as like a pack of 8 different systems mashed together with his friends at university, trying to work out like, right, we want to play like our favorite bad movie plots, like that's what we want to do. And that like that we've not found anything that kind of meets our needs. So this is what I've got. Do you reckon it's any good? And I read it and was like, this is like the core of this is amazing. Like it's got loads of elements that are really cool. We spent some time working on it, and eventually decided, right, we think this is good enough that we could release this. Started doing some playtesting, and sort of almost by accident, we were asking sort of our friends and our extended group for people who were interested in playtesting this game, and Ben, who's like worked with my partner at the time at her company, said, "Oh yeah, I'd love to play this. I've played some D&D, and I'd love to try something new." And while we were playing the session, he was doodling pictures of what was going on in the session, drew his character. We saw the pictures, and we're like, "This is awesome. This is exactly what we want it to look like, almost." And so I had some back and forth with him. We started developing the style, and that's kind of how we ended up where we are now, with launching the first Kickstarter, which was very well received. We had an amazing time doing that. We finally finished fulfilling that despite COVID and the world's best efforts to slow that down. So now we're here and we're ready with Gothic to sort of continue the journey and grow the game into more genres and have it be something that people can play as a sort of a mainstay of their RPG lexicon.
Yeah, so it sounds like you have a plethora of experience with with marketing the game, and there's a lot to marketing the game, as you said, listening to people as to what their experience is and what they want different in their experience and what they want to play, and then being able to look at a huge library of games nowadays and be able to distill that down, and obviously content creation and helping to create this. And then your brother Charlie, who couldn't be with us today, it says he has a lot of experience in the TV and film industry. So I imagine a lot of the narrative aspects of this and cinematic aspects of this came from his brain.
Yeah, absolutely. So lots of the world building, the stories, the narrative, as well as some of the rules, all came from his brain. I'm kind of just sort of like an extra hand on the rudder, making sure that we're going in roughly the right direction in that regard. But also things like promotional videos, podcast editing, all of that stuff. He's a dab hand at doing many things as well as writing. So it's really helped us that we've had a strong core team that has a lot of transferable skills. It's made things like getting the trailers for the games made much easier. The fact that our artist can also animate his art and make it into a video really speaks wonders to how talented the team is. I sort of just like make sure that we're going in the right direction.
Well, that is an incredibly useful skill to help direct things along, and you can definitely see that in Shiver. There's a very good balance between the game being narrative and evocative and cinematic, and having all of that codified into mechanics that you can actually play. So having the two of you working together, I mean, it really makes a powerhouse to put out a really good game.
Yeah, so one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to make it as rules light as you could possibly make it without having to have prior inferred knowledge of how role playing games work. One of the core sort of design tenets we had when we were building Shiver for the first time was what can you play? Like how do you approach building a role playing game for people who have never played a role playing game before? And what about role playing games is it that is a barrier for people to be able to enjoy that experience? Like where's the stumbling blocks? Like what's going to really stop people dead? So the first thing that we identified was numbers are bad. Nobody likes doing maths. Maths is not fun. Maths pulls you out of the story. So we're gonna take the controversial decision and make our dice symbolic rather than mathematical, which I know some people don't like, but it's one of the reasons why we did the app as well. Is we wanted to make sure that we're doing it purely for a design purpose. We don't just not to make more money. It's we want to make the game the best it can possibly be. So by removing the maths, we sort of aim to up the immersion. Then the other problem we identified with kind of dice was the success or fail, like binary dynamic. Some games have delved into this a little bit better with sort of minor successes with drawbacks, and like kind of codifying that for the person running the game. But we haven't really found much that many systems that used the act of rolling as an aid in the role playing itself. So with the dice for Shiver, all of the symbols tie to specific attributes of your characters, the core skills, of which there are 6. They cover like the breadth of things that your character can do. So say you want to get through a door, you're going to try and bust down a door. You're going to need to roll your dice and look for a grit symbol. You're looking for grit symbols, the orange fist, to do something strong, something that requires your physical power to get through that door. You roll your dice, and all you're seeing is yellow brains, some smart symbols to tell you that you've probably not done something that strong, but you might have done something. Your character might have done something smart instead. You maybe clatter into the door and feel that it's not going anywhere. Step back, and then suddenly you look under the doormat and find the key, and just unlock the door. And it gives you as a player a way to explain failures and to fail forwards, and almost to succeed from failure. Whilst what can happen with other systems in that scenario is you roll your check to get through the door, fail, and then we continue to fight the door.
Yeah.
And everyone else lines up. They also run at the door, and we Takeshi's Castle our way forward through the story. So that was the next thing that leads kind of onto the next problem that we wanted to solve, which was what happens when people fight a door. We don't want that to happen. We don't want one person to fight the door, then the next person to fight the door. How do you stop that kind of spam roll, that the everybody tries the same check problem? And so that's kind of where the Doom Clock mechanic came from. So the Doom Clock is a narrative clock that is built to keep the story moving. It's also built to up the tension of the stories you're telling. So how it works is whenever a player fails a roll and they roll strange on their dice, it ticks the Doom Clock up. It can also tick up in a bunch of other ways. If players are using their weird and wonderful powers, if they're playing a character like the Weird that has can see the future, move things with their mind, those kind of abilities turn into a werewolf. This can also tick the Doom Clock up. You're destabilizing the story world. Things are going to get bad. And so major junctures on the point on the clock: quarter past, half past, quarter to, and midnight. The director of the game, RGM, will have designed some despicable and awful things that they're going to unleash upon their players.
Mm-hmm.
And those happen at various points along the clock. And what that does is, in a scenario where we're fighting the door, you roll your dice and you fail and you're all strange. I ticked up the clock from fighting this door. I'm probably not going to keep doing that, especially if I'm not a strong character and I need to attack a door. I'm not just gonna chance my arm at trying to kick the door down, because I might just bring my own demise upon myself as I tick the clock up. So it's a fun mechanic with that, and we've expanded that mechanic a little bit with Gothic as well.
Very nice. Yeah, we'll talk more about those tools going forward. I like to break down when I look at a new game. I like to break down the rule book and how I go about learning a new game into themes, rules, and tools. And we'll delve into the more specifics of that later on in our talk here. But yeah, the reading the knucklebones, which is the first one you talked about, rolling and getting different symbols other than the ones you want, is a great way to keep the story moving forward. And then the Doom Clock really helps to put a mechanic behind to help facilitate the GM in constantly escalating the situation and to keep things moving forward, which can be a problem in some games, especially binary games where you fail and then you feel like you're stuck. So it's nice to see that you codified a mechanical ability to keep the story moving forward without putting all of the onus on the GM, on the director. It's sort of built in and it's expected.
Yeah, we wanted to provide that kind of the narrative device that you get in some stories, but codify that into a mechanic. The rising floodwater kind of issue, where it's like the ticking time bomb of like this story is going somewhere, and we're not just going to dawdle smashing pots in a Zelda style scenario to try and find all the loot, because that might end badly for us, because the bomb might explode while we're doing it.
Right. Okay, well, I know you've already talked a little bit about your prior experiences with gaming, starting off in video games and transitioning into Magic the Gathering and then into TTRPGs. That's pretty much the exact route I took myself, and a lot of people take to get into tabletop role playing. What can you say about what got you initially interested in tabletop role playing as opposed to video games or Magic or say board games that don't have that role playing aspect to it?
So I did a decent amount of theatre as a young person, which I don't do anymore. And I think one of the things that's really appealing about role playing games is the creative element. I also do some wargaming. I play miniatures, and I think the reason I like that is a similar reason to the reason why I was drawn to TTRPGs, is that there's a creative outlet for you. You build a character, you're building a world, and there's so many different ways for you to interface with that creativity. Some people are building hundreds of characters. Some people have a character that they've been developing for years. Some people have immense worlds that they've built for their home brews. Some people make maps. Some people design items. Some people make their own role-playing games. And there's this huge huge swathe of ways that you can be creative with the TTRPG space, which is really, really nice. And I think the indie TTRPG scene kind of is a representation of that, and it kind of gives you that showing of like the different levels of, as you were saying before, everything from business card to 300-page rulebook span. And it's nice, really, because it's encouraging to see people engaging with the idea of role-playing games in that way.
Right, right. And not just engaging with the creative aspect of the game, but obviously engaging with each other in the role play aspect of the game, because you definitely get a different experience playing different kinds of games. But there's something out there for everybody, as long as you can find the right people and you can find the right game. But nowadays, with so much online gaming, that was difficult 20 years ago, having to, you only had your friends at school, or you could put up a post on the college message board or something. But nowadays, keyboard at your fingertips, you can find a group doing pretty much whatever system you want in whatever level of role play or mechanical involvement that you want.
Yeah, the other thing that I always encourage people to do as well is get thyself down to your local game store. You will be amazed at the amount of role playing game communities that you will find, playing all kinds of stuff. There's always one forever GM at every local game store that's played every system under the sun. And if you say enthusiastically that you really wish somebody would run this niche thing for you, you will be surprised at how many people appear out of the woodwork to play a 30-year-old fantasy game that nobody's ever heard of because you think it looks interesting.
Yeah, I don't know too much about the differences between here in America and over in UK, but I've never been all that fortunate to live in a place that has a successful, welcoming local game store.
So in the UK, UK is tiny. You can drive from one end to the other in 6 hours. Like it is not a big place. Um, Pretty much every major city has at least one local game
Oh
store.
wow.
Most big cities will have two or three.
Wow.
So in Nottingham here, where my game store is, we have two, four. I could drive to, in an hour's radius, I could probably drive to 6 or 7 game stores.
Wow.
There's a lot. There's a lot of game stores, and there's a big community of gamers for all kinds of games, tabletop, role-playing games, card games, board games, miniatures games. Where we are in Nottingham is it's known as the Lead Belt. It's the right in the centre of England, but it's known as the Lead Belt because it's also where all of the games companies are that make miniatures. Games Workshop's headquarters is 15 minutes down the road, and so there's in where we are especially is a huge hub for gamers. And you always find people that want to play stuff, which is awesome. Over in the States, yeah, everything's a bit more spread out, but I know that there's still a lot of game stores. Obviously, the depending on where you are, but
Yeah.
most big metropolises tend to have at least one.
Yeah. I've
And it's
actually had
not. You've
this.
got way more conventions than us because
That
we
is
do
true.
not get very many conventions.
Yeah, that is true. We excel on the conventions. This is actually a topic I was talking with somebody else about, and my experiences growing up in New England, and northern U.S. East Coast, and there wasn't a lot there in the both collectible cards, playing cards, and TTRPGs and war games and whatnot. At least in my area. Since moving south, I've found a little bit more resources for that. But I know Midwest and towards the West Coast, there is actually a lot more local game stores. Um, but
It's all of that spread out from Seattle where
yeah,
Wizards is.
yeah, it really comes down to where you are.
Yeah.
So
But like you say, if you've not got a local community, online is great.
Mhm.
Obviously, conventions are amazing, and there's so many pickup games and so many little conventions and local communities, and they're great as well because you meet people who are maybe near to you for a travel, and you can organize weekends worth of gamings. Because I know a lot of role players do that, but get the cabin in the woods kind of scenario going, and play RPGs for as long as they can stay awake.
This would be a great inclusion into a cabin in the woods excursion. Yeah, talk about
The really meta with
nightmares.
our horror stories is
Yeah,
players go and play an RPG and then it turns out very badly for them.
that's when you got to get your friend to secretly show up and just skulk around outside, tapping on windows and banging on things.
Well, that was one of the things that we want to do at some point. Is we want to do some proper experience stuff with Shiver. We got lots of disused factory buildings and things in the UK that would make great overnight role playing
Very
kind of
nice.
venues. So
Very nice. Yeah, so obviously you've had a lot more experience with local game stores, and as you said, how expansive that can be and welcoming that can be into different genres and different game systems. Uh, and I've seen a lot of influence of other games, at least the ones I know. I can draw some comparisons between other games and Shiver here. What were some of your inspirations and favorite games that you've played or run or seen played or just read the book that sort of directed your attention over to how you've designed your game?
interesting. Yeah, so I think obviously Dungeons and Dragons is the game that I've played the most of, as is pretty standard for
Mm-hmm.
most people. And I think when you're trying to design something for the broader role playing game audience, you kind of have to start at that point of right, what is everybody playing?
Mm-hmm.
Why are they playing it? And kind of work backwards and work out what's appealing. Obviously, there's some hurdles that you fall over with that. So there's a bit of D&D in there, but also we wanted to combine that with a lot of the rules light stuff that's getting more and more popular at the moment. The OSR
Mm-hmm.
kind of idea of kind of hitting that halfway house between where you've got rules light and you've got rules heavy, and then somewhere in the middle it's what like a racing car team like trying to strip
Yeah.
weight out of the car. Like what can we cut from here that's intimidating and unnecessary that we like things like encumbrance. Hate
Mm-hmm.
it. Like personally, I would never like if I'm playing D&D, my players get to struggle with not having much gear because they're awful, like horribly poor adventurers trying to make a name for themselves. And then we get to a certain level, somebody gets the bag of holding, and all of those encumbrance rules can just go in the bin.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us, it's identifying things like that, but also going the other way and going, oh, what does D&D do well? Like what's cool about D&D? Like the spell slots. That's an interesting idea. It's an interesting way to do magic and work out how to limit the power of magic in the world, because otherwise everybody's just casting fireball all the time. And so you can learn. This is one of the kind of the key things about design and writing in general is the more stuff you read, the more cool stuff you can pull from and helps you design. So yeah, D&D big one. In terms of some rules light stuff, I spent a lot of time reading Death in Space, which I was a big fan of, which is sort of from that Freely collective area. Call of Cthulhu, obviously, we read a lot of. I know that my brother has been playing in a long-standing campaign with that. It's got that kind of mystery element. It's got the horror, and it has some interesting mechanics from a jobs kind of perspective, which we wanted to kind of bring into Shiver with backgrounds. And then you can kind of go the other way with it. You can look at games like Fire by Romer Card. It's the core system is really interesting. It does some interesting stuff with things like HP, where you can be attacked on multiple levels rather than just your physical health. You've got reputation and things of that nature. Because that was another element that we didn't really like with like numerical HP. But we understand why some games do it. Like having a big number for HP that you can vary up and down means you can make fighting a goblin feel important, but you can also make fighting a dragon feel important, and that's interesting. But yeah, I think games like Spire, where they have some interesting mechanical stuff, but then they also lynch that interesting mechanical stuff onto, which is not the wrong word, attach that mechanical stuff onto a world, and the mechanics are very intrinsic to how that world works. And that was another thing we wanted to look at, was like, right, well, how do we make the game feel like a horror game? Like, what can you do, and what have other people done to do that as well? So yeah, it's there's all kinds of stuff. As with most people that kind of get deep into role-playing games, all that happens is your pile of books gets bigger and bigger and bigger that you want to read, and you just get to enjoy that element of the hobby as well.
Yeah. Uh, before we transition into talking about the settings specifically, I think it would be a good segue to ask, what are some of your just favorite horror shows, movies, books, what have you, that has led you into this project?
Absolutely. So when we first started designing Shiver, I was adamant that I wanted to turn it into a universal, like,
Mm-hmm.
uh, all of the stories all of the time kind of system, because I was not a big horror fan. And so me and my brother had lots of arguments about why horror is or is not a great genre. And safe to say, he won those arguments by convincing me that actually horror is an incredibly broad church of stories. When you consider that things like Jurassic Park is a horror movie, and suddenly it completely opens Pandora's box for, oh,
Mm-hmm.
actually, maybe I do like horror, but not in the way that I've thought about it previously. It's not all axe murders and
Mm-hmm.
horrible things happening. It can be mystery. It can be like stranger things, like weird things happening with
Mm-hmm.
suspense and threat. It doesn't have to be horrible and awful. So for me, I'm definitely on that lighter end of horror writing. So things like more modern references, Stranger Things. I love that classic sort of Jurassic Park era, um, like like stories where like modern technology is kind of scary. So like Jurassic Park's really fun because it's playing with like, oh, like what's the scary idea that we could have when we're talking about manipulating DNA? Like
Mm-hmm.
what's the scary thing that you could do with that? I was like, oh, you could just make a dinosaur. That's scary,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really cool. I also really like the sort of more pulpy stuff. So things like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Hellboy,
Mm-hmm.
all of those kind of horror. I would describe as horror light. Probably get told off by somebody who knows more about horror than me for that. So big fan of that. More broadly, the Warhammer 40k universe is a big influence for me, which is both horror and also horrible,
Yeah.
and sort of that grim darkness has weaved its way into some of the stuff we've written. Yeah, it's a super broad thing. Me and my brother spent a lot of our childhood watching lots and lots of movies. Like it was one of the things that our mum kind of brought us up on, was like this is important for your education, that you watch all of these cool movies and watch Ghostbusters and all of that kind of stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
watch things that you probably shouldn't be watching, and Jaws will probably scare you and make you afraid of the water for quite a while, but
Mm-hmm.
like also it's given us this like very rich sort of reference point to start writing stuff for Shiver as well.
Yeah, very nice. Seems you have a lot to draw on, and I like that you recognize that horror is not just the Walking Dead 28 days later Saul just unnecessary gore and violence. It can be cerebral. It can be suspenseful. Um,
It can also be Scooby Doo.
yeah, it could
So
also be
like
Scooby
this
Doo.
is just
Yeah,
so there's so much it can be.
yeah. So when talking about the setting of Shiver, from what I understand, as you've just said, the base rulebook is pretty much setting agnostic. You can run anything from Goosebumps to Aliens if you want to, which I think is amazing, because it they're two totally different feels of how you would experience that if you were watching a show or if you were reading a book, that you've been able to put into the mechanics of the game. Uh, so I really enjoyed that. But the Gothic expansion obviously does have its own setting. The Spire
Yes,
Home,
indeed.
right?
Fire Home, yeah.
Yeah. What can you tell me about uh, that specific setting? Why did you choose that specific setting, and how did you express that and codify that into how the game is played?
So Spy Home actually was the original homebrew setting that we used to test Shiver for long form stories. So when we finished designing the game as a whole, we looked at how you would take the system in its original one shot format, genre agnostic in terms of horror subgenres, and would apply it to a longer story, but also look at how you would flavor it for a specific genre. And so Spy Home was Charlie's creation for, right, I need somewhere that I could dump people that's like a big gothic sandbox, that we can hit every reference point that you could possibly imagine that a gothic story would want. And that's kind of where Spy Home came from. It's this huge, sprawling walled city, in nondescript kind of alternate history fantasy, um, sort of implied Eastern Europe. Think like roughly where things like Dracula are
Uh-huh.
set, like somewhere in that region, of the world. And it's this city state in a country that is beset with monsters and awful things. Um, and it has survived for so long because it's a massive walled city, with a port to keep it supplied, that is under the protection of, uh, this religious order called the Divine Order, who founded the city. And within the city, we've got all kinds of things that you can interact with, political intrigue, different factions, locations galore that you can populate with whatever you want it to be, whether it's rat men or, cultists or anything, anything from that like gothic area. And then what we've done with that big sandbox is that's the surface. That's the this is you look around. There's spires and bloody streets and people with plague, and it's grim, but it's an existence, and
Mhm.
that's your surface level. And then what we've done is there is unbelievable amount, I would say, of lore and backstory buried in that environment that you can explore either as part of the story, or there's, information in the book about how you just go about building your own adventure in Spy Home.
Mhm.
So that's Spy Home. And then in the other book, in Dregstone, so underneath Spire Home, uh, is an emerging society called Dregstone, which is basically where everything that is unwanted, unneeded, or cast away ends up, from the city.
Mhm.
And within that, there's another story. Dregstone book is really interesting because we were trying to work out what we wanted to do with that environment. Because we came up with the idea of Dregstone almost by accident. And how Dregstone kind of came about was we were telling the story of Spy Home, and we were running our long running session, which we're still playing now in Spy Home. Um, and we had some players who couldn't turn. There's missing some players. You standard RPG
Mhm.
like problems. One of our players is busy and we can't play, but we all really wanted to play. So Charlie was like, right, what can we do? Right, all of you need to make me a level 1 street urchin, and we're going to go on a level 1. We're on a street urchin adventure. And what happened was, through a series of ridiculous events, we end up in Dregstone. And what happened then was, whenever we were missing players, regardless of whether they were in this first adventure or not, urchins would pop in and out of the story, and we would continue on our merry way. So Dreadstone that's what it's designed to do. Is if we have this side story that fits into the main Spire Home narrative, or you can tell it completely separately. It fits into the main Spire Home narrative, and you can play it with a modular number of players. So if you're missing a player, down into the depths you go, and you can carry on playing. And it kind of was a way of us trying to solve that problem. So yeah, it's kind of a expansion to the story, but also not, which is really fun.
Right. Yeah, because that is a common problem with role playing groups. One or two people show up, and then the story can come to a halt. So it's nice to have another sort of basement level to be able to do extra stories in. So I see with the Gothic expansion, you've already mentioned a number of these things. It's going to come with a full story world and setting, and it's going to have its own built-in campaign to play. So
Yes,
can you give us a
does.
teaser for what that living world that campaign
I can
is?
indeed. So the story of Spire Home. So Spire Home established and has reigned in relative peace for a long time, as long as people can remember. It's not the greatest place to live, but it's safe from bad things and monsters that are outside. So we carry on going about our business, and that's largely fine. But recently, in the city of Spirehome, things have started to happen that maybe suggest that peace is starting to be disrupted. The story starts with the murder of a high-profile member of one of the main ruling families of the city, and your characters are tasked to investigate that murder as part of a sort of ad hoc investigative team. And as you begin to explore what has happened with this murder, you also then start to uncover other things behind that veneer of normal society that make you realize that something's not quite right here, and that gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and eventually we uncover this kind of the secrets of the city and why the city exists, and you delving into all of the kind of touch points that you would get in your classic Gothic novels. You're looking at things like fear of technology and emergence of new technology, fear of outsiders. So there's people from outside the city who've arrived, and there's factions that trust them, and there's factions that are scared of them. You've got things like the demise of the old systems. So you've got factions that previously had a lot of power, and their power is crumbling in the wake of modernization or other factors. And so it's kind of a story that combines all of those Gothic touch points and really lets you get a feel for what it would like to be in that world, whilst also telling an interesting narrative.
It sounds like a lot that you can engage with in a number of different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got the other thing that we've got between the chapters is we have interludes which allow you to expand that story. So we have some interesting side characters and your sort of quest givers, but also like sections on other areas of the city that we've almost left as a blank space for players to delve into. We've got I know that we have like a hospital, for example, in the story. But it's not really featured super heavily in the narrative. But there's all of the information about it's there, and you can use it in your story, and you can bring it into the Spire Home adventure. But similarly, we have things like we have a key character in the story called Zheng Hong, who is information broker extraordinaire. He a little bit on the shady side, side business in dealing sort of monster parts and other things, more esoteric, but he will pay handsomely for information or various other things that are hard to come by. And so we've got a series of things like bounties and rewards that you can get from him to kind of flesh out your story, give players options to wander around the environment and explore those dark alleyways and unexplained places that maybe they wouldn't have done otherwise as well.
Yeah, yeah. I know one of the biggest, I don't want to say complaints, but it's probably the best word, of D&D is that, you have the three main pillars of RPGs: combat, exploration, and social. And in D&D, the default is almost combat. A lot of the rules are focused around combat abilities. Your statistics focus around combat. So a lot of D&D games devolve into just running from one place to another, punching things until they stop being a problem. But with this game, it really seems like not only do you have a lot more ways to deal with that, it's almost discouraged, especially in the base rules where and
Yeah,
you could argue that.
I think so. I think definitely, like we were talking about earlier, horror is a very broad genre, and I
Right.
think depending on what the genre is, the approach to combat is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
Different. You're telling a slasher story, or players run up and punch the slasher. There is usually only one way that that's going to go,
Yeah.
and it's usually dead players and a slasher continuing on their merry way.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go and punch some rat men, that's probably going to go a bit better for you. So the gothic horror definitely leans, especially when you look at gothic horror in through the lens of modernized fantasy. If you look at something like Ravenloft, the D&D setting, which is functionally gothic horror, um, you have that space for combat. Also, the great thing about gothic horror is it has that almost perfect balance of opportunity for combat, opportunity for mystery,
Mm-hmm.
and opportunity for social. And it has the perfect blend. So you're not having to consider as much about whether you should be fighting people. And usually, the question that you're running into with gothic horror is not, should I be fighting this thing because it might kill me? It's, should I be fighting this thing because it's the right thing to do?
Mm-hmm.
Is Frankenstein's monster fundamentally evil and should I kill it? Or is it a tragic thing that I should let live and set free?
Very nice.
That's actually the question you're asking with combat a lot of the time. And obviously, yes, there is some combat where you're fighting ghouls or whatever, and they're mindless things that you're fighting with. But that's one of the things that we tried to get across with Spy Home. We actually did a live stream yesterday of the early bird campaign that we were giving away if we funded early, which we did. And that is a sort of love letter to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And we got to the final fight of that story. And it literally got to the point where every player had an agonized look on their face as they could not decide whether they wanted to fight or run away, because they didn't know what to do, what was right for their characters to do.
I love those stories.
That's the kind of thing that we want to generate with Gothic.
Yeah, I love those stories. If you follow any of my stuff, I do a lot of that in my own stories. But I very much appreciate you clarifying that aspect of combat there. But the second half of that thought was, there's not just combat. There's a lot more in this game, and a lot more that you just said from the setting that facilitates and encourages investigation and diplomacy and engaging in mystery, subterfuge, all of that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I know that when I've run campaigns before, you do have players who, like, you get to the town section of your story and they're just gone.
Yeah.
That's it. Not interested anymore. We're not bashing heads. I'm out. And so making sure that all of your environments have something that like players can engage with that they enjoy. So having a little combat environment in your puzzle section of your story that doesn't detract from it. It just means that your player that loves bashing heads is still going to engage with that environment. But the same is true for town, or and combat. Like in combat in Shiver, we really encourage people fighting smart, because in most horror movies, if you don't fight smart, you'll die.
Mm-hmm.
So we make sure that all of the environments are loaded with other stuff, so that if you don't just want to get your flintlock out and start blasting vampires, there's other ways that you can maybe like facilitate helping the rest of the people you're playing with.
Mm-hmm.
You smash a boarded up window to let the sunlight in, find some holy water nearby, look for a book on scary Bible words. Like, yeah, there's all kinds of stuff really that you can do. But yes, it's something that we really want to focus on, because there's definitely a lot of systems that focus very heavily on combat, and we wanted to make sure that we got the mystery element, because that allows combat very rarely allows players to dig deeper into the world and the story and immerse themselves in that narrative experience, because it can just be like whack-a-mole, bonk bonk.
Yeah.
And you don't get that like to and fro, and so having those mystery elements where players are like agonizing about riddles and puzzles and reading books and finding clues, and then having that aha moment where it's like, oh, I understand what's going on, I understand why this character said this to us now, and that's really nice, I feel.
Right. I'm gonna take this in a sci-fi direction because it's what I know most. But the way I see what you just described is the difference between Alien and Aliens, where if you're familiar, in the first one, the big question is, what is the problem? What is this alien? Where is it? It's super dangerous. How do we avoid it? How do we stop the problem? And very suspenseful, very narrative. You don't fight the alien, it will eat you. But then you go to Aliens, and it's a very different setting. It's a very different feel. When you have people with giant machine guns and flamethrowers just cooking up aliens left and right. And it's very interesting that you can get both of those sort of feels in the same game.
Yeah, absolutely, and it really shows that the importance for how your players will engage with the story is the way that you apply the narrative that you want to tell to the setting you're given. Because Alien and Aliens are set in the same world. You have all of the same story rules, but you've just structured it in a different way.
Right.
And there will be groups that love Alien, that don't want to play Aliens, and vice versa.
Right. So as far as a setting, it does sound like a very evocative and expandable setting that allows you to do a lot of various different things in it and really engage in a role-playing game from multiple different aspects and multiple different play styles. So let's step away from the setting specifically and talk more about the general, like I said before, the themes, rules, and tools of the game. Because we're just past that that hour mark here. So let's talk more about the game specifically and how it's played, and more specifically why it was designed to be played that way. So first of all, I always like looking at what a particular game refers to the game master as. And in this game, it's the director. And I think that's a very appropriate choice given the inspiration of this coming from TV and film, and of course literature as well. But it says in the book that the director is creator, storyteller, actor, arbitrator, and player. And I think you can see a lot of that in many other different games. Like most games, as the GM, you should be doing a number of those things. But I like how you broke down the GM role and assigned it the title of director, which to me evokes a mind of, again, like a film director directing the players along a path, but not necessarily defining what that path necessarily is. So why did you choose the term director, and what were you trying to get across uh, promoting that sort of mindset going into game mastering?
So one of the kind of talking about the design philosophy, one of the things that we realized is one of the reasons that people don't play role playing games is they don't have any way to run a role playing game, because jumping in as a player generally isn't that intimidating. You've got three friends who already play role playing games. You want to get into it. They've already got a book. You can read through it. And you can just build up a character.
Mm-hmm.
Hell, they'll probably even build you a character if you want them to, and you can just sit down and start playing.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that's actually intimidating is going, I'm going to get a role playing game for some people. And what we wanted to do was take a person who's never GM'd a game ever and have the director section of the core book be a, you know nothing, read this section of the book and all of your fears will be dispelled and you will be able to run the story. The words director is definitely tied into that idea of like film and television, steering players along, but we also wanted to get some references in there and talk about what makes a GM a good GM. So things like, how do you put a story together? Like, no, not many RPG rulebooks are going to teach you 3-act structure and tell you how to actually put a story together. And we wanted one of the other reasons we called the GM a director is we wanted to ground the way that we were educating them about how to tell a story in Shiver in that film and TV experience that Charlie had, in terms of how you get taught to write a script and how you get taught to present an interesting story. And so I wanted to provide that kind of context as the starting point, because ultimately that's what you're doing in a role-playing game as a GM. You're constructing a fun and interesting story, but then allowing your players into that loosely defined story structure and letting them and directing them within that environment. So that's kind of where that came from, really.
Very, very good. Yeah, you talked a bit about those tools that you have in the, teaching how to be a director without giving too much away, because it's in the full book. What is your big takeaway or your favorite lesson that you could give a prospective director?
Ooh. So I think the one that comes to mind, which is the one that we have in the book, is know your audience.
Of course.
Which is when you're designing a story, you're designing it for the people that are going to consume it. And so asking players what it is they want to play or know, like, it's way easy. So if you're running a game at a convention or something with people that you don't know, this is kind of more difficult. But if you're running a game for people you know, and you know that they all love Alien but hate aliens, then you know what kind of story you should be telling. You should be telling this dark sci-fi story with a single antagonist that's suspenseful, but there's low combat, interesting environment, but ultimately very locked in. But if you've got players that say love Starship Troopers, then ramp up the comedy, like make the environment broader. They want a variety of different kinds of aliens. They don't just want the one. Like, and you kind of get that idea from what your players are expecting. And if you know what your players are expecting, you can design a thing that they're going to enjoy, but you can also subvert it, because when you're playing you go, oh, we're going to do Alien. We tell the story like it's going to be like Alien, but it's not going to be the same. We're going to change some names and mess around with it. And then when you get to the point where you have a key element of the story that you want to subvert, then suddenly that effect becomes even stronger, because they're, oh yeah, we really suck it into this thing that we know we love already, and oh, you really got us because we're totally expecting that thing to burst out of its chest, and suddenly that person is in fact just controlled by the alien instead, and it stayed inside them. And it's like, oh no, what's going on? Like,
Very nice. Yeah, knowing your player, and I think adding on to that myself, having that discussion as a sort of as a session zero. A session zero is super important. Knowing your player so that you can build the story in the general direction that they want to take, but still have surprises in store for them is a great rule, or a great guideline for new GMs.
There's an adventure that we have, a story that we have that isn't currently published, that's been written by our new writer, and it has the most diabolical subversion of expectation I've ever seen, in terms of making players think that a creature's weakness is one thing, and then when you try and use that weakness on the creature, it makes it 10 times stronger. And
Very nice.
it's like the most savage thing I've ever seen in written form, because you as you're reading the story, you're like, oh, they're totally going to fall for this, and it's portrayed so perfectly, and you can imagine the player's reaction as they pour water or something over this creature, and it's like, oh yeah, no, that's just made it stronger.
Very nice.
Terrible idea.
Very nice. Okay, yeah, so it seems you put a lot of thought in the GM side of things, which is very appreciated, especially in a core rulebook, because as you said, it's relatively easy to get into being a player, but if the game itself doesn't have any way of directing a new GM into how to engage with the rule system and the themes, most importantly, tools to help that along are super useful. And one of those tools, one of the ways that you express that varying thematic level is the difference between survivor mode and nightmare mode. And when I look at that, I immediately thought video games. This is the difficulty setting you choose when you start up a game. So the baseline for that is survivor mode is not easy mode, but it's more forgiving. You don't die immediately. There's extra opportunity for you to survive. Nightmare mode is the big, like, hardcore, you get penalties while you're wounded, you take damage, you die, you're out, sort of thing. What was the inspiration? What was more specifically the reason to make these two different difficulty settings?
So we had an interesting sort of weekend where we were playtesting, and we had two back-to-back groups, both with completely different sets of players. And in one session, we played exactly the same story. And in one session, the players that all died had a great time. And in the other session, the players all died and they had an awful time. We realized that, if you're telling horror stories, not everybody wants to tell the horror story where everybody dies. There are people who, like, if they're telling the slasher story, they want the slasher story ending to be the character's triumph over that obstacle. And that is the most satisfying way. And it kind of ties into the know your audience thing of, like, if you know that that's what your players want, and they want ultimately the ending of the story to be optimistic, then maybe you want to be playing with that survivor mode so that you give your players that chance to do that. While we found that some of the more the other group, who I loved that all their characters died. I thought it was brilliant. Having that option there allows people to go, oh, I think they had one character survive and escape, and all of the other characters died in service to the narrative. And there are players that will find that to be the most satisfying experience from a roleplay perspective, is I want to go out with the grenade in my hand to save everybody. And so that's having that option there for the players who are interested in that style of role playing is really interesting as well. I know for me, player death was a taboo that we wanted to kind of attack a little bit, because it is a massive thing in role-playing games. Like killing characters is bad, and we found that as long as you frame it correctly, it can be really, really interesting.
Yeah.
So, for example, we had a playtest session where I had conspired with the director running the session, to have my character shot in the face and die within the first 15 minutes of the story.
Nice.
I proceeded to then play the rest of the story as my character's dog. And it was one of the best sessions of Shiver I've ever played.
That's great.
But also, everybody else in the story who didn't care about my character before suddenly really cared about my dog character, who was lassying up the, like, pointing at clues and like full on going for it. You can do those kind of things with death. We have rules in the system for haunting, which is another great way you can keep players in. You can also really get into it with antagonistic play. If you're playing like maybe an American Werewolf in London style story and one of your characters gets bitten, they can disappear off screen for a while and then come back and they're the monster and they're fighting the part. And that's really cool. And so trying to show players and sort of tease to them that character death isn't necessarily the worst thing, and that if you approach it right, it can actually make the stories really fun.
Right.
Is one of the things we really wanted to get across with Shiver.
Very nice. Very nice. I definitely resonate with that. I definitely lean more towards nightmare mode, both as a video game player and even aside from sci-fi horror. I was saying this earlier. I definitely appreciate the older form, more suspense, more mystery, more cerebral horror that you get, and I think the nightmare mode has extra tools in there to help facilitate that level where you maybe everyone dying is what it takes, and that can be a fun experience.
Yeah, the expression "the final girl" exists in horror for a reason. Like horror stories where characters don't die are often they're not as interesting, and that it has to be an element. And we have a lot of stuff in the director side of the core book that's about setting up characters to be murdered, like so that you can use a death to tell so many things about a story, from how dangerous an enemy is to how bad a situation is. There's so much you can do with that, or even to invest your characters into the world. If you have an NPC that the players really fall in love with, and then you kill them at a key point in the story, it's a really good way to like rug out from underneath the players and get them really invested in the narrative.
Right. Very good stuff.
It sounds horrible, but that's.
Oh no, I love it. I love it. I'm that kind of GM. I'm that kind of player. I am there for that. But speaking of facilitating ways of increasing danger and whatnot, that's where the Doom counter really helps move the story along. We've talked about it before in how that every 15-minute mark, increasingly more dangerous things happen. But I do like that it is an escalation, and it's not necessarily an immediate escalation or a directly noticeable escalation. I notice reading in the book that there's examples of when it can be something that immediately happens, but there's also examples of later down the line when you get to the end of the story. If you're at the 3/4 mark, well, there's one less escape pod than there are players. Oops.
Yeah, you can really like have fun with it. We've had things like the escape vehicle that you were planning on, like that you've been working towards the whole thing, suddenly is missing a part because you've ticked up the Doom too far, and you're going to have to solve that problem. And so it allows you to provide extra hurdles for players to cross as a result of their actions. Interestingly, with Shiver Gothic, we had to then develop that system for longer form storytelling. So the Doom plot works really well on a one-shot level, but not necessarily as you're telling a longer story. So how we kind of dealt with that is the Doom clock well, doom clocks are applied on a chapter basis in the Spire Home story, and as a general for telling long-form stories. So maybe across one session or a few sessions, depending on how big your chapter is, will
A more
carry
episodic approach.
yeah, so you have that doom clock for your chapter. So you have your first chapter, and say maybe you get to half past on that, and you unlock a couple of doom events, but it doesn't get too crazy. What that then feeds into is the doom calendar. And what the doom calendar is your overarching doom mechanic for tracking the destabilization of your overarching story that you're trying to tell as a whole of the parts of whatever, however you want to segment it. So in that example, you get to half past in chapter 1 in Spire Home, and you've done some bad stuff, but not too bad. So the doom calendar ticks up a little bit as a result of your actions from that chapter. And what that's going to do is it's going to have the same effect, but on the story as a whole. So maybe people trust you in the city a little bit less. Maybe your sanctuary gets set on fire. Maybe a vampire gets away that didn't get away before. And that feeds in from that doom clock into that bigger narrative, and that's a really fun way to kind of play with that. But also, much like the doom clock, where if you use the Ouija board, the doom clock ticks up. You can also have bigger narrative touch points feed the doom calendar. If you leave the nest of zombies alone and don't kill them all, then that's going to tick the doom calendar up, because there's more zombies in the city and you could have prevented that. And so it's a really interesting way to give players those interesting decisions without forcing them on that kind of like morality steering boat that you sometimes end up on. So you can do that bad thing, but it might turn out bad for you later on.
Right. Very nice, very nice. Well, that you actually anticipated my next question, because that's something I did identify with the Doom counter, was that it would be very useful in telling a one shot, but how does that apply over a story that takes weeks and months? So the idea of a Doom calendar is a great extension of that, and I'm really excited to see how that is detailed and then how that is applied in the game.
Yeah, it's one that we're really excited for people to like get to grips with, because people have had a lot of fun designing their own Doom events for stories for the clock, and the Doom calendar is just that amped up to 11. You just got so much more option to take your Doom clocks and combine them in interesting ways to the calendar.
Very nice, very nice. Okay, and I think lastly, to round out this idea of themes, obviously the most directly digestible one for players is their class, their archetype. So I see, at least in the base, and I know you said you're expanding on that in Gothic in a number of different ways. But there's, what do we got here? 7 different archetypes that you choose from. The warrior, which is the jock, the heavy hitter, the scholar you touched on, the scientist or a detective, maverick, the slippery type character, socialites for those who want to play charismatic manipulators. One of my favorites, the fool, who is just a bumbling idiot who accidentally survives and is helpful.
In my opinion, the best archetype, the one I definitely play the most.
Yeah. The weird, which from my understanding is basically being the good monster or the party monster.
Yeah, I definitely disagree with that. I think I've
Okay.
played with more weirds that have done bad things and worse things than the monsters we've been fighting than I've played with good monsters.
Nice.
People really love going super dark on their weird character creation.
Nice. And lastly, the survivor, the unkillable, the last man standing sort of thing. Without going too, because we're limited on time, without going too deep into each of them, why did you choose these specific classes? Where did you draw from?
Yeah, so with the core book, we had to figure out how to get this massive task of having a system that could tell any story from any genre of horror and have any character be built from the same base set. So what we did was rather than grounding our character creation in a specific world. So if you look at something like D&D and you go cleric, rogue, wizard, all of those identifiers are grounded in the world in which you're playing. What we chose to do instead is, much like how in the director section of the book we talked about how to structure a good story from a narrative perspective, the character section of the book is designed from a how to structure a character, like how characters are actually formed in all stories across time. Is they are archetypal. They have, you know, that the warrior is strong and brave, and you know that the scholar is smart and thoughtful. You know that the maverick is dexterous, fast. Like you and having those archetypal characters allows you to have a base starting point of qualities that you can then define within your world. Because I think one of the examples we give in the book is your player wants to play a maverick, and setting they want to play a sniper. They want to play a sniper. They think that's cool. That's how I like to play characters. I want to play a really precise ranged character. I want to be a sniper. But the setting that you've got for them is medieval. So perhaps they're taking that trait of being that long-ranged, accurate, dexterous character and then applying it to medieval setting, and maybe they're a crack archer, the best longbow shot that anyone's ever seen, kind of idea. And abstracting those concepts about the character allows you to then go deep into whatever setting you want.
Now, and each of these archetypes do function loosely as a class. They all have their own abilities, special skills that they use.
So each of them has an ability tree with abilities that you can mix and match to form a character. Those abilities again are very broad in their definitions so that you can apply them to as many stories as you possibly can. Things like you have a peculiar artifact that does a variety of different things, but we don't define what that artifact is. That could be anything from cursed jewelry to a piece of alien technology. Like it doesn't, it's not defined, so you get a bit of space with how you want to bring those abilities into your story world. So all of those abilities are very broad. And what then we're going to do with Shiver Gothic is bring some slightly more specific abilities so that when you're jumping into a genre, we've got a little bit more definition. So the Gothic genre, we know that we're going to be telling stories of a certain type. There's obviously some variety. You can have Dracula in the more modern age and stuff. But you know that there's going to be some commonalities to Gothic stories that the abilities can reference. So the abilities and archetype adaptations that we're bringing in with Gothic for playing as monsters will tie into the core book and allow you to expand those characters and delve into the more Gothic elements of character creation, as opposed to just staying on a completely broad tract.
And a great way to provide examples to help facilitate, if you take it out of the Gothic expansion, facilitate taking that more evocative narrative approach and refining that into something specific to the setting you chose. So very interested in seeing what that's going to be like. And I know
I think people are going to have a real hoot with that. There's some real fun abilities. We did a lot of, one of the ways that we actually do some of our designers, we make sure we leave space for, as players come and interact, our playtesters come into the environment, interact with those characters, and try and do something in the story that maybe isn't covered by an ability. that we can have space to kind of encode that in the system. So we trying to think of an example here. We had a character that had a demon teddy bear that she had sewn together from a number of different teddy bears.
Love it.
And we realized that being Dr. Frankenstein is interesting. How do you define Dr. Frankenstein if you're just looking at it from the lens of making stuff from human body parts? What happens if you're making it from just like stuff that you found, or maybe you're taking a more like naturalistic approach? You could be sculpting yourself a new person, and suddenly it opens up this world of how you're dealing with those abilities. It's going to be, I think it's going to be great, and people are really going to enjoy that element of Gothic.
Very nice. Very nice. And of course, even in the quick start guide that you have available for free, towards the end of the book, there is a number of pre-generated characters that have their own different skills and flaws in there that you can use in a quick start adventure, but also use to help derive your own skills and flaws and help define your character.
Yeah,
I like pre-generated characters; they're very helpful.
Yes, the quick start in particular, we went down very well. Corporate Risers, the story in there was written by my brother after he'd spent a long time working in a corporate film environment in a multi-level basement, putting subtitles on foreign films and having generally a bad time. And so taking that and applying the metaphor of an awful zombie corporation has struck a chord with, I think, quite a few players. And yes, the characters in there are fun. Everything from sort of psionic experiments to the janitor. So you really get a breadth of the ways that you can attack character building and playing characters in Shiver.
Yeah, I'll admit I didn't get a chance to read through the entire Corporate Risers, but it looks fascinating. Looks like a really different take of how you can experience Shiver, opposed to the Gothic horror that's coming.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more modern. I mean, zombie horror, obviously, but also it really delves into that corporate horror element as well, of looking at how modernity and the modern world is horrific in a variety of different ways.
But with a fun level of pulp, from what I've seen too.
Yes, there's still plenty of puns and jokes
yeah.
And all kinds of things. Again, that's another story that I've played a dog in. It's a nice. Throughput.
Nice.
I essentially played the dog from Up the last time I played that with an experiment collar that let him talk.
Very nice. Well, distilling that even down from the archetypes and their abilities and the character itself, one of when looking at a new game, mechanics create the lens through which players interpret not only their own character's actions, but what is important in a particular game and how to most effectively go about taking action within that specific game, within that specific rule set and the setting. So in order to do that, you created those core skills: grit, smarts, luck, wit, heart, strange. And obviously those are similar but very distinct from the usual D&D strength, dex, con, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. You can tie some of those together in a number of these different core skills. But why did you choose this specific distribution of skills, and how do you want the player to view that lens through them?
So the first thing we kind of had to do is make sure that we had a core skill for every action that a character could take. The reason we have 6 is because a D6 has 6 sides.
Yeah.
And so that maps really nicely to the dice. We managed to get it to the point where we got 6, and we were happy that every action that a player could take would tie to those dice. It allowed us to subvert some things that players would maybe associate with one of those classic 7. with a specific skill so that you were losing the preconceptions that people had maybe developed in other games for what certain things mean. Because if we were to take those 7 skills and map them again, people are going to be playing in exactly the same way, and they're going to have a mindset about how the story works and how the game world works. Whilst if you provide them with this new structure, then suddenly this is a whole different ball game, and they're looking at those as a specific way to interface with the stories that Shiver's telling, but also it makes players immediately start thinking about and looking at the dice, and aids in that reading the knuckleballs Doan's role-playing element as well.
Right. And I like that. I like any game that has a luck stat, because any game that doesn't have a luck stat I think is a detriment, because there's definitely calls every now and then to just how lucky, how what is the chance that this happens, that is sort of agnostic from how physically or mentally proficient you are in something. But I also really like, specifically I'm looking at the wit stat, which is both mental and physical dexterity, so you can kind of draw from both the D&D dexterity and, say, wisdom skill. So it leads to characters who interpret their actions and their character, in my mind, through a more learned approach to how they go about doing things, as opposed to grit, which is more direct application of force.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, if you think about how a smart character is portrayed in D&D, we'll use the D&D example because it's the one that most people will be able to relate to.
High intelligence characters,
two characteristics. You have your 2 characteristics that are linked to that idea. You have intelligence and you have wisdom. And the axiom that you're playing on when you're talking about how smart a character is in that regard is how much raw stuff that they know do they have, and how well is the stuff that they know applied to the world. That's your wisdom, and that's your intelligence. And that's a really interesting concept, because you get to go from a high wisdom, low intelligence character where you're playing something like the sage, who what they know is perfectly applied to the world. It's very specific, but what they know is it's the way they apply it is amazing. And you go all the other way of the person that's read a million books but has absolutely no idea how to apply the knowledge that they have in their head.
Right.
And that's a really fun way to play with how smart a character is. So in Shiver, what we did was, well, actually, there's multiple different ways to think about how smart somebody is. Smart in Shiver is kind of almost like intelligence in it. It's raw. How much do you know? But also an extent of how well can you apply that over an elongated period of time.
Reasoning.
So it's kind of a combination of both that wisdom and intelligence. But wit is almost a smartness through expertise.
Right.
So you could describe a person that knows how to defuse a bomb as smart. I don't know how to defuse a bomb. That would be under wit, because it's a dexterous skill, but it's also how quick thinking you are and how well you're applying your specialist knowledge to a specific idea.
Right. And then you have heart on top of that, which is not just your charisma, but also social awareness or general awareness of your surroundings.
Yeah, it's not just charisma; it's also understanding the way that characters are interacting with you. It's your emotional intelligence as much as you have your just raw intelligence, and that can be useful in completely different ways. Your character with high hearts is much more likely to understand the Sphinx, because if they're speaking in riddles, you might be able to crack that.
So it does shape how you define your character differently using these stats than you would the D&D 6 stats.
Yeah, absolutely. It allows you to be a bit more fluid, because you have this kind of definition, but there is argument that these stats can mean. We define them, but we don't define them so rigidly that you couldn't
Right.
argue that maybe one stat would have merit doing something else.
Mm-hmm.
And that way you don't have that problem of, oh well, your stat says this.
Right.
Because ultimately what we're playing Shiver for is to have an awesome narrative experience and have a load of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that we have in the core rulebook is these rules are made to be broken.
Mm-hmm.
If something in this isn't fun, change it or get rid of it.
Right.
We don't believe that we've written the perfect role playing game because we think that's
There
impossible.
isn't one. Yeah.
But we've tried to get as close as we can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like stats like this because it's the lens I take it through is that it puts more emphasis on the approach to how you solve the problem as opposed to the degree in which you can apply force, whether that be physical force or intelligent force or charismatic force. It focuses on the approach rather than the attribute.
Yeah, two grit could mean that you successfully kick the door in the hinges rather than your leg is bigger and stronger than
Right.
the person off the leg next to you.
Right. Yeah, so a lot of very creative characters you can get just by playing around with the stats. And of course that ties directly back into one of the tools we talked about before, reading the knuckle bones. In that even if you're good at one thing and you just happen to roll bad, your character is more than just the big tough dumb guy. If you happen to be good at grit but you don't have great say smarts or wit, but that happens to be what you roll, using the reading the knuckle bones approach can give you a different way to perhaps look at a situation through the mindset of somebody who thinks in a grit sort of way, but does things differently.
It just allows for great story moments when your barbarian-esque character who hasn't got a brain rolls their 2 dice for their smarts that they've probably got and gets 2 smart symbols. That the barbarian's going to have a stroke of genius. It's
Right.
going to be amazing. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same feel as you get when somebody rolls a natural 20 in D&D for something that they have no rights doing. But it feels better because you have that the visual cue of oh, this is really cool, but you can also be creative with it. Like with D&D, if it's not a 20, if I roll a 19, I can't do that. Whilst if I roll 3 hearts and 2 smarts on my wit roll, I'm like, how do I work out in what intelligent, charismatic way my character has managed to circumnavigate the problem in front of them?
Right. Providing alternate means of moving forward. Perhaps even, and you did fail the roll, so it's a means of moving forward, but perhaps with complications.
Yeah, and it's nice as well because it's in front of you and it's visual, which means that not only you are trying to solve that problem, but you have other players and the director all looking at that result going,
Creates a
I wonder what that
conversation.
could mean. Maybe I've got a suggestion, and
Yeah.
that's really fun.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like most about tabletop role-playing games is the fact that it is a collaborative storytelling experience, and this really facilitates that. And the flip side of the reading the knuckle bones is the strange symbol. You come up with a bunch of strange symbol, and you can that's on the GM to the director to really take that away in a strange, probably detrimental, dangerous fashion. Do you have any fun, creative examples of reading the knuckle bones? One way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me have a think. So we had a character who actually died off in our long-standing campaign, who was actually the original one of the original genesis for the D6 randomizer table, using the core skills as a way of displaying an ability and how it could have different aspects depending on the core skill that it was attached to. And he had an ability where he could have a clone of himself, a doppelganger. His person would split, and he would get a completely another version of himself. He would do this by rolling a skill dice And depending on the skill dice he rolled, what skill he rolled, it would determine the qualities and attribute of his doppelganger.
Mm.
And so, if he rolled a grip, his doppelganger would be stronger than him. Whip, faster, smarter, more charismatic, weirder, really, really lucky. And that was really fun, and that was a really interesting way to get that kind of knucklebones element across. In terms of like rolling lots of strange, you can have it's the really nice thing about that is when players see it, they not only do they know they failed, they know that something is bad's going to happen, and they knew that when they picked up the dice to roll them, that they bought into that.
Uh-huh.
So you can actually be quite mean as a director, much like in the kind of systems where you get told that you can take a hard move or something like that.
Yeah.
You go, oh, you pick up the flamethrower. Flamethrowers, this is a good one. So playing an alien style corporate sci-fi story. One of the characters is a dodgy con man selling bad flamethrowers. He's got one flamethrower, which is his demonstration flamethrower to show people that his flamethrowers are excellent products. That
Works perfectly.
Yeah, obviously, first time that this flamethrower gets used in any real regard, 3 strange, flamethrower explodes.
Yeah.
Character is on fire. Chaos ensues. Standard.
Love
it. It's just so much fun stuff. You can do it all the way from like exploding flamethrowers to you tried to do something cool on ice. You rolled a load of strange and you banana peeled it on your ass.
Right. All right. Well, I think with that we've covered pretty much everything I had, and we're pushing up at time. We're at our 2 hour mark, which was the top end of the time I had blocked out for you. I don't want to keep you any longer because I know you have a mammoth project dealing with Kickstarter and all of that. Do you have anything you would just like to add? You'd like to point out anything you'd like to highlight?
I think probably the main thing I would say is like thank you for anybody who's supported us on the Kickstarter. It's been truly crazy, and we have had an absolute blast writing Gothic, getting the world ready for people to explore. So really excited for people to jump in and explore that. If you haven't backed the project already, please do go check it out on Kickstarter and see if it's for you. Especially if you maybe aren't a big horror fan. And are thinking about maybe whether you want to back this, I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at it and get a feel for the project. I wasn't a big horror fan when we started designing this game, and I've been really turned around to how much fun you can have with the genre. Other than that, I just really encourage people to explore the indie scene. There's so much amazing stuff out there. Every time I go on Kickstarter or go on Twitter, I see a new game that I've not come across before that has an amazing concept, really interesting ways to tell stories, and there's so much out there to explore. So definitely sort of go digging for some of those hidden gems and engage with the indie RPG community, because there's so much good stuff out
there. I can definitely second both of those. Definitely check out the Kickstarter. If anything, it is a work of art in and of itself. But it looks amazing. It's already funded, so you know you're getting a quality product. You know it's going to be fulfilled. There's a number of stretch goals that are already completed. So there's a lot of stuff on here for you to engage with. I even see there's a little playlist here, so you can listen to some fun tunes.
Yeah, we had some fun putting together a little playlist. When it turns out when you're writing and you need the music that you need for writing is very similar to the music you need for playing, because you don't want it to have any words in it. It needs to be full of atmosphere to get you in the mood for writing really good stuff. So we're just like, why are we just listening to this independently? So we have a team playlist, and that's where that came about.
Nice. So I linked the Kickstarter link in the chat, so definitely go check that out. You can also find Barney here, and I assume the whole Parable Games team in one way or another on Twitter on their Games Parable. So you can find them there. We have our own People's Ascension Twitter at PPLS Ascension on Twitter, and our Discord where you can find myself. Parable Games is on there now, and a load of other creators that you can go check out. So all of those links are down below. I don't need to spam those in chat. But as far as today, I had a blast talking with you, Barney, about this game. Obviously, you're enthusiastic about it. Obviously, you're very knowledgeable about it. I love talking with creators because nobody talks about a game like the creator of the game. You can see the passion behind it. You can see all the gears turning in their head when I ask mechanical questions and narrative questions. It's really fun for me to talk with creators. So thank you very much for being on, for talking with me on Shiver. I wish you the best of luck with this new Kickstarter, though I don't really have to because it's already funded. But just keep going with that. The more you get from it, the more stretch goals you can complete, and the more foundation you can build for your upcoming projects. Because you said you have even more stuff hidden in the background that you're working on. So I'm
Yeah, absolutely. So all of the funding that we're getting from this is just getting poured back into to make more role playing content for people for Shiver. So we're the more funding we get, the more fun stuff we get to do. So it's
very nice,
it's 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 gonna be great.
very nice, very nice. Okay. Well, for anybody who came in at throughout this interview, throughout this episode, just as a summary, we covered a lot. We covered a lot. We really got to know Barney here, talking about his experience and his inspiration getting into the game. Running games, local game store management, and whatnot, and the design of the game, and of course, a brief talk about his entire team. Uh, Charlie with his experience in the narrative cinematic side of things, Ben with the amazing art. We talked about the setting and the fact that it can be setting agnostic and the new Gothic expansion. And I think between both the base rule set and the Gothic expansion, you're going to have everything you need to play a game. You have the broad baseline for creating whatever game you want, and then if you for those GMs who don't like to world build their own system, because it is a lot. It's a lot creating your own setting. You can jump right into Gothic, or if you need help creating your own setting, you can use the tools in the guide, the director's tools in that book, as well as the examples provided by the Gothic expansion to help define your own setting, and help lead you on the way. Of course, we talked about the rules, tools, and themes, and there are a lot of them in here. A lot of very I don't want to say loosely defined, but more emphasis on being evocative and narrative when it comes to a rule set, so you can play multiple different subgenres and different characters in different ways. It seems like a very flexible but also very robust game, which I know is a very delicate balance to hit. So, kudos on finding that balance. So we've talked plenty about the themes and how to make a horror game feel like a number of different types of horror games. We talked about the basic rules, though this is not a tutorial. We talked about the basic rules with the archetypes and the core skills. And there is, of course, the dice roller, which is still up in chat, and the tools, things like reading the knuckle bones and the doom clock, which I've looked at other reviews and other things you've done, and everybody their go-to is Knucklebones and Doomclock. It's a very that is one of the most defining qualities of this game, and I cannot wait to see this game in practice. We talked about this before starting the interview. Once Gothic is complete, I would love to talk more about getting on for a full RPGs Uncovered season, because I think the game would really lend itself to a full tutorial and a demo play. So we'll definitely be talking about that. No promises, because I know we're both very busy. I don't want to put anything on either of us live on air. But I know I am going to be checking out this game, going to be checking out Gothic, and I can't wait to play it at least with my own group of friends. So I guess in summation, to wrap up, amazing job with the game, amazing job with the Kickstarter, getting that funded and continuing to push through. I haven't done a Kickstarter myself, but I've heard how difficult it and exhausting it can be. So great job pushing through on that. And of course, finally, thank you so much for being here with me.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you very much for having me and delving so deep into Shiver and what it's all about.
All right, very good. So we're gonna wrap up here. If you like what we did and you want to see more interviews like that, well, first of all, let me know. Leave a comment. You can't really do that here on Twitch, but head over to Twitter and leave comments there. I'm going to be posting the video there, or at least the link to the YouTube video there. So head over to YouTube when that is posted tomorrow sometime, or hop down in Discord and just let me know what you think. Talk to me, talk to Barney, talk to all our other creators. And if you can, I know it's a difficult time for everybody. If you can head over to our support sites, Ko-Fi and Patreon. And again, anything we get as far as that is going to go straight into the quality and quantity of material that we can produce here at the People's Ascension through RPGs Uncovered. So we're going to wrap up there, pushing a little bit over time. Thank you, Barney, for being with us, and pushing the time there. And thank you, audience, so much for hanging out with us. I hope you found it fun and educational and inspirational, and I do hope you check out Shiver Gothic and help them get even far on that funding. So from us at People's Ascension, thanks for watching, and keep checking back here for more content. Everybody stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy, keep having fun, and keep checking back at the People's Ascension for more RPGs Uncovered content. Good night, everybody.